Joining us now, though, he's going to straighten this all out for us. That's why we have him on, so he can make sense of this mincemeat. Congressman Rob Wittman, representing the 1st District of Virginia. He's a Republican, and he's also a ranking member on the all-powerful subcommittee on sea power readiness. Congressman, great to have you.
Good morning, John. Great to be with you, and happy post-4th of July.
What did you think of the President's July 4th celebration yesterday?
Well, listen, I thought his speech was spot on. It was very much about the history of this nation, the things that have made us great. I thought it was a speech that inspired, a speech that brought together the pieces of history to really put in perspective what makes this nation great and what will continue to make it great. So I thought it was very inspiring.
This open borders narrative, you want to weigh into this? Where are your colleagues going with this? I mean, in 8 days, we've gone from no wall, they don't want a wall, they don't want any barriers, to they want to decriminalize coming into the country illegally. So basically, it's open borders, which means you can come in and there's no consequences, to giving them free health care, to now we've got your Minnesota colleague, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, calling for the abolition of the Border Patrol. Now, I could see other people like Christian Gillibrand had called for the abolition of ICE. So basically they're saying, once you're in, we're not going to throw you out, get rid of them. But now she wants to get rid of the Border Patrol. So there is no patrol on the border, open borders, and there is no border. This is 8 days they've gone here.
Well, John, as you know, the sovereignty of any nation is based upon being able to define who it is and where it is. And defining that obviously requires that you have a border. You look at other nations around, they have borders, and they clearly create order at their border, and that is people that come and go have to go in an orderly fashion. The United States has laws that require that, and many of those laws I think need to be looked at, especially some of the asylum laws that I think are needing modernization. But if you get rid of the elements to create order on a border, to actually have a border so you can be a sovereign nation, then you're no longer a sovereign nation. And that I think, should concern everyone. I don't care what your political stripes are. It also creates a chaotic situation. There's no security. I mean, this really is about homeland security. How do you secure a nation if you just allow people to come across the border without issue? If you eliminate the Border Patrol Agency, how do you then create order not only to people but traffic that comes across the border? All of a sudden now we know the drugs that pour across the border in clandestine ways. Think about it. If you don't have formal checkpoints, if you get rid of the Border Patrol Agency, what does that leave us? And she talks about reorganizing, but reorganizing to what? If you get rid of that, that's the agency that has Border Patrol checkpoints, that checks vehicles coming in to make sure that they aren't transacting illegal goods, drugs, those sorts of items, and making sure too there's order on the border to where you don't have people with malintent coming across the border. How do you create order? How do you create security without the Border Patrol Agency or Border Patrol agents? I'm at a loss as to how you do that. As you said, if it becomes open borders without any way to create security, to create order there, to make sure that you're. I mean, there's already challenges with drugs pouring across in certain areas where there aren't enough Border Patrol agents. Where you try to control trafficking both of human beings and of drugs across the border, and these traffickers get pretty ingenious about how to avoid Border Patrol agents right now that are just tremendously overworked. Can't get to all these different places. So now if you just completely eliminate that, that's the green light to folks that say, hey, I can freely get in the United States, don't have to worry about answering any questions about who I am, what my intent is, or the flow of drugs or other items that come in that you don't want in the United States. Now all of a sudden you talk about agricultural items that could bring in disease and things that could devastate our agricultural production here. I mean, all of those things come with what happens with Border Patrol. And if you take all of that out, if you say we're going to eliminate Border Patrol agents, just have open borders, all the risks that go along with that now inundate the country. It just doesn't make sense to me that somehow you say let's just eliminate all of that, and that the country is going to continue to be secure, is going to continue to make sure we minimize threats to our economy, to our national security. I mean, all those things are part of this. So it confounds me that somehow this is the way that they see a border being managed, by just taking it away, as you said, having open borders, no control at the border. You don't see other countries doing that. You don't see sovereign nations saying we're going to have an open and unconstrained, uncontrolled border. It just doesn't happen.
Congressman Wittman, has the Democratic Party gone crazy?
I don't know. There's certainly folks in the Democratic Party that are providing food for thought for a lot of folks. I know as folks look at these proposals, there's certainly questions that come up. I think all those questions are legitimate. Those will be part of, obviously, the debate that takes place over the next year and a half in leading up to 2020 and what this nation is going to look like, what each party proposes as to their platforms, and certainly some of the things that members of the Democrat Party have come out, like Representative Omar and others, will be part of that debate, and the determination will be made in this election cycle. Is that the direction that people want this nation to go? I think I can tell you the people that I talk to, and I was around the district yesterday on July 4th from one end of the district to the other, and the people that I talk about, feel very strongly that we need to secure the nation's border and that we have obligations to make sure that we are securing our nation through these efforts, and it's required in the law. So it's not as simple as saying do away with the Border Patrol agency. It's a matter of, now what do you do to uphold the law? And if you're not going to do that, that in itself becomes problematic too, John. We are a nation of laws, and we have an obligation to uphold those laws.
Congressman, I normally don't like dragging you into, let's call it, social commentary, right? We really stick to the facts. You've been coming on my show every week for 8 years, right?
Yes.
But I'm gonna. It is July 5th, so I'm gonna take a little change from that today, if you don't mind. And a lot of us are outraged, Congressman. Just have a conversation. A lot of us are outraged by the Betsy Ross flag Nike debacle. Now you got some MSNBC guests coming on, and I think it was Michael Dyson saying that it was like the swastika. I mean, I'm 61 years old, so I find this to be just an incredible 3 weeks of my life here, listening to these people. I mean, I grew up where, that you learned about Betsy Ross and George Washington wanted a symbol and a flag, and she got her sewing machine out, and she created it. It was his 13 stars and stripes, and what they meant, red, white, and blue, the red being the blood, the 13 colonies. It was like the freedom. It was a symbol of freedom, this country being created, this wonderful thing. And somehow it's now turned into people saying that it was like a swastika. I mean, how do you think middle America is reacting to this crack pottery?
Well, John, I think, many of the assertions made about the Betsy Ross flag, I think are just based upon a myopic view of that particular flag. In fact, the Anti-Defamation League said that it doesn't have this particular flag in its database of hate symbols. So, and listen, there may be an isolated incident of an extremist group that has occasionally used this flag as a symbol, but overall, in total, this flag is just a historical representation of the development of our nation and of symbols of our nation. It is a historic flag. It is not anything that has been used I think to the point where people should be concerned about it as a symbol of hate. That's just not the case. And again, the Anti-Defamation League on Tuesday said as such that it doesn't relate to that. Now you can take many things out there and say, well, this is on occasion been used as a symbol of hate, but that denies then the overall body of evidence on this, and saying that the Betsy Ross flag is clearly a historical symbol, and it's commonly used by people for patriotic purposes. And again, the Anti-Defamation League essentially said it was an innocuous historic flag. It's not a thing in the white supremacist movement. So to be able to take this and say there may have been an instance where it's been used by an extremist group, denies the historical context of this flag and what it has represented through the years. I mean, I can tell you there are a lot of other symbols out there. If you say that now we are going to condemn any symbol that has been used by any extremist group, then there by chance are not going to be a lot of symbols out there that don't have something where they've been co-opted by somebody that has intentions that we may not only object to, but we may just disagree with. So I think that you have to be careful about this, and certainly this flag is essentially an innocuous historical flag.
What I thought the meaning of it was, what I was taught growing up was that that was the symbol of freedom of tyranny from the British. I guess I wasn't taught that it was about white supremacy. I mean, I just, for the life of me, I don't know where your colleagues on the other side of the aisle are going with this, and I don't know how they're going to win in 2020. That's why I got to tell you, Congressman, I am more confident about Trump getting reelected when I see this stuff than ever, because maybe it's going to play on MSNBC, and maybe the fake news lying legacy media is going to play offensive line for them for a while on this nonsense. But I just don't see how they're going to win any of these swing states with the positions that they're taking day after day, and they're getting more and more extreme. I just gave you the example of how they've evolved in 8 days. 8 days they've got the party, the leaders of the party running for president in 8 days have gone from open borders to no consequences if you come over, to no law breaking, to free health care for illegal immigrants that come over illegally because now they're not illegal, to voting because no census question, and now to what Mars says, we eliminate border patrol agents. All that's done in 8 days. What are they going to do in the next 8 days? I mean, it's incredible. All right, let's get to Iran. They're enriching uranium over and above the standards for the JCPOA. A layman's position like mine is, let's say, okay, we had a deal. Trump said bad deal. He got out of the deal. So once the U.S. got out of the deal and put all these sanctions on the Iranians, they no longer have to abide by the uranium enrichment qualifications. And now the Europeans have to deal with, because they're still abiding by a deal that now the Iranians are violating. What say you?
Well, I think the president was correct in that the deal itself was ill-conceived. It was problematic from the very start. The European nations that were part of the agreement have stayed with the agreement, but we've seen act upon act upon act of bad faith by the Iranians with really no intention to abide by the deal. And, of course, the deal was front-loaded with all the benefits, so all the dollars went back to Iran. All the concessions were made up front, so there was no motivation for Iranians to do anything but violate the deal. It's up to the Europeans now to say we are going to, I think, take action in response to Iran's production of nuclear material. I think that they ought to join together with the United States and others to say, let's place the sanctions on Iran. Let's make sure that we stand by putting the necessary diplomatic pressure on them to stop this, to come to the table to get an agreement that will actually work, to get an agreement that you can actually you can confirm that they are eliminating the production of nuclear materials, the weaponizing of those materials. Verification, I think, is absolutely the key with this, and that it was never a strong element of the original deal. As you know, too, there are other elements where we can continue to put pressure on the Iranians. I'm glad to see that the Brits seized a Syrian-bound oil tanker from Iran over the past several days, taking action against the Iranians. As you know, the elements there of what were in the agreement that the Europeans are still part of include efforts to make sure that they can enforce this deal. It appears at every turn that the Iranians look to violate the terms of that deal, even though the United States is not in it anymore. So hopefully our European allies will look at it for what it is, and that is the actions of the Iranians are contradicting what the words on the page say they should be doing. They are not doing any of this in good faith. I think the Europeans should join together with the United States and look at the sanctions as well as other nations around the world. Now, we understand China and Russia are not going to be with us on this. They benefit from what the Iranians are doing to try to destabilize the Middle East. But I think all other nations ought to look at this and say that if we are going to band together and have any chance of keeping the Iranians from producing nuclear materials that are weaponizable and then weaponizing that into a deliverable nuclear weapon. And remember, the range of those weapons continues to increase. So it's not just endangering the Middle East area and places like Israel. It can even endanger Europe and the United States. So I would argue that it's time for the Europeans to deal with reality, what the Iranians are doing, join together with the United States, and what we ought to do is to create a coalition around the world of every nation that says, no, we're going to stand against this, including nations in the Middle East, nations across the globe, and as we know, China and Russia are not going to be with us on this, and take a stand against Iran. If you don't do it now, if you continue to allow them without consequence to develop nuclear materials to be weaponized, they're going to continue to threaten. They're going to continue to create risk for nations, not just in their neighborhood, but at further and further distances. And I can tell you the threat will grow from them to a point one day where it will create a problem for other nations. Better to address it right now, better to address it in conjunction with all the nations across the world to bring this matter front and center.
Congressman, when you say we have to deal with Iran now, are you suggesting, would you be open to some sort of a military strike?
John, I think, listen, I don't think you ever take any of your options off the table, but I have deep reservations about getting involved in another military conflict in the Middle East. I think there's so many other options out there available to us to deal with the Iranians. I think the opportunity of last resort, or the option of last resort, I should say, would be military conflict. I don't think that you necessarily take all of it off the table, because I do think that there has to be consequences for Iran if they were to take action that resulted in deaths of Americans. I don't think you can say, no, we're not going to react to anything. But I do think that there are so many other options out there available, and boy, we better think long and hard before we get involved in a military conflict in the Middle East. My concern is as we see today with Afghanistan and Iraq that have continued on for years, that the long-term impacts of engaging in a military conflict are costly, both in human lives and in resources, and become a real challenge for the United States to come to a conclusion with, as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think that there are a lot of other options out there, and we should pursue all of those, and do everything we can to avoid a military engagement or conflict there in the Middle East. But again, we shouldn't be afraid to defend our interests. or to make sure that we are standing strong against any effort that endangers or takes American lives.
Congressman Rob Wittman, have you told that to National Security Advisor, the President John Bolton, and the other neocons and warmongers running around the White House in Washington?
Well, I've made it pretty straightforward with folks what I think the options need to be and how we deal with Iran, and that conflict ought to be the last option on the table, the absolute last option on the table.
Congressman, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being with us today.